In South Africa, 7 women are killed every single day, and a reported 40% to 50% of men have admitted to perpetrating physical partner violence. The people opposing women abused or POWA has urged government to fast-track the 3 new bills introduced to Parliament in September 2020, specifically intended to tackle the country's deplorable status quo. To discuss this further, we are joined by former award-winning TV and radio news anchor Tracy Going. Tracy, a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you.
I mean, how would it feel, being on the show that you've presented for close to a decade? It does feel like stumbling upon an old pair of sneakers at the back of the closet that you haven't worn in a long time.
I've just lost you there.
Anyway, let's talk about gender-based violence. President Cyril Ramaphosa has labelled GBV as the second epidemic in our country. It's the start of the 16 days of activism. What are you seeing happening in our communities, and why is gender-based violence such an issue?
Oh, that's a big question. I think I'm seeing an escalation, and everybody I speak to feel the same way. We're seeing an escalation of violence against women and children in the country. There's not sufficient stigma attached to being a perpetrator. It's still condoned, it's still allowed, it's even applauded by other men. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And the figures that you gave, that 40 to 50% of men in the country that have been surveyed feel that it's okay to physically hurt a woman, that is alarming. And we've woken up in lockdown and seen horrendous cases of women being murdered, left in shallow graves, hacked to pieces, hanging from trees. It is terrible. Women's bodies in this country are crime scenes.
And why is POWA calling for these 3 key bills to be urgently fast-tracked?
Well, I think that there's certainly an enormous amount of work that needs to be done. So the bills as they stand are extremely complicated. So just to really simplify it, one of the bills is looking at amending bail conditions and minimum sentences. So that needs to be done, because what's happened is, you get a restraining order, you're beaten up, you're stabbed, you go to the police station, and the perpetrator is released back into the home almost immediately. So this is very important, this particular bill. The other one is the extension of our meaning of relationships. Is it just a marriage, or what about customary marriages, or just being engaged or being in a relationship with someone? Who can report? We're looking at incest, and then including the elderly to be victims of domestic violence, because there's a lot of abuse of older people in our country.
Tracy, so often we feel like bystanders and we don't really know what we can do to make a difference. How do we add our voice to help?
Well, I think what's enormously powerful about this particular campaign, in Domestic Silence campaign, is that JOCO and POWA are calling on South Africans to actually record a message and hashtag it, End Domestic Silence. And this is all going to be collated and then sent to Cyril Ramaphosa, because what we want to do is we want to expedite these bills, because a bill can take a very long time to go through Parliament. You're talking up to even 3 years. That's a very long time when we're calling this a pandemic, the second pandemic in the country. So it needs to be expedited, and this is what you can actually do. And the other thing, the first part of the rollout campaign that JOCO Tea did with POWA was every box of 100-bag tea that you buy, R1 goes to POWA. And last year they managed to raise 5 million rand. This has gone into providing shelters for abused women and children and providing counselling. This is an enormous campaign, and I'm really, really proud to be involved in it. And I think everybody else can get involved in it.
And unfortunately, Tracy, some women make excuses for the perpetrators themselves. Some say, it's just a mistake, our family will deal with this, he was frustrated, he was drunk, or he will change at some point, and so on and so forth. So how do we educate women to have a voice and not shy away from these issues?
Oh, it is so complicated, and that's why it needs to be tackled from all sides. Very often women are too afraid to leave. They know that when they leave, the chances of being murdered are exceptionally high. We know that. The other reason is financial disempowerment. You've got children, and unfortunately, violence against women is systemic, and it also plays out in the fact that women go into what are called soft services. Soft services like nursing. There's nothing soft about nursing. Teaching. So women go into those traditionally underpaid environments, which are essential services. And then that puts them in a situation where they cannot make decisions to leave an abusive man. So there is so much that needs to be done and can be tackled from all sorts of sides.
And there's so many cultural nuances come into play, and especially in the African setting where women say, I have to live with it for the sake of the children, because if I go back home, if I divorce and then go back home, what will the community say? That I would have failed in my marriage. And most of the cases are not being reported to the police, and that on its own says a lot, Tracy. Do you think that women are scared of being judged, or is it how the law has often failed them?
Yeah, I think this is where women come into play as well, because often a woman will, I've time and time again heard what you're talking about, people running away in a township and then going to their mother or mother-in-law and they say, go back where you come from. Yeah. You must look after your husband. That is hugely problematic, and we need to support each other. I grew up in a home of domestic violence, and I want to tell you that has left me fundamentally changed. And I found it very damaging to grow up in a home of fear and violence. And I would have preferred, even then as a child, I asked, can we leave? And it's enormously damaging growing up in a home like that, because very often victims then become perpetrators and the cycle is not broken.
And how would you advise those who were in your situation currently? How do they deal with it? I think, like, for me, I know a lot of women don't go to the police. They certainly don't go to court. Therapy is a luxury. That's not an option to most people. So I think we need to turn to our own support groups, or unless you go to an organization like POWA, which has an infrastructure in place and can support you in the right way. But also, if you don't want to go that way, tell people your story. Just share your story. Get it out so that you can start dealing with it and you can become empowered and you can make different choices going forward. And what's the way forward? We can't only be talking about women and child abuse during the 16 days of activism. How do we continue fighting this? Because I suppose with a high degree of certainty that this should be an ongoing conversation and shouldn't only be confined to November.
No, it should be. And it shouldn't just be women and children, because I think we talk about patriarchy being the ultimate problem about violence, about masculinity and what that means to so many men, to be the aggressor, to be violent, to be the one who's always in control. But I think the first victim of patriarchy is the man himself, is the little boy himself, who's grown up to suppress any emotion, who is not allowed to cry, who's not allowed to feel. So we need to also we really need to be including men on a far greater level in this, because men need to be talking to each other about this as well. Yeah. It can't always be, I feel as a woman, it is always us talking about it. Mm-hmm. And I want to say, where are the men? We're doing something wrong here. How do we address it? What can you do to bring about change?
And what other challenges do you experience on a day-to-day basis, and what partnerships do you have in place to sort of help you on your mission?
What can we do to keep ourselves safe? Is that what you're asking me? As women?
Come again, Tracy?
So the question, just repeat the question to me.
Okay, no, I was just asking you what other challenges you experience on a day-to-day basis, and what partnerships do you have to help you on your mission?
Challenges that we face as women, we face them every day. Our bodies are crime scenes, and we walk on the street, we are vulnerable. We sit in our car, we are vulnerable. We're in our home, we are vulnerable. I think we do as much as we can as women, to try and keep ourselves safe. We don't go out on our own, we walk with one or two others. So I think there are a lot of challenges that we face. And it's really inconceivable that those are the kind of challenges that we face, that we can't even walk on the street safely. True. So, but I think as far as the 16 days of violence go, the activism go, there are a lot of organizations. And again, if I can just, if somebody's in a really desperate situation, if I can redirect them to POWA. And in fact, Joko T, if you go onto their website, www.joko.co.za, they actually have a whole section there where you can go for advice if you feel that you need some help.
All right. Tracy, great chatting to you. Thank you so much for joining us, and thanks for sharing your thoughts with us. All right, there we go. We just spoke to Tracy Going on POWA's 16 Days of No Violence Against Women and Children campaign that aims to end all forms of violence.